Welcome to another episode of the Distributed Data Show, brought to you by DataStax Academy, where we bring you the latest news and interview technical experts to help you succeed at building large-scale distributed systems.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Distributed Data Show. I'm Dave Gilardi, and I'm here with Chris Splinter, who is the product manager for Developer Solutions. Product manager for Developer Solutions.
That's right.
Okay, great. Why don't you help me understand what that is, because I'm obviously having a hard time saying it.
Sure. So we are all about the developers. We offer a couple products in DSE, the drivers that also work with Cassandra. And then we also build other things like Studio, and we just came out with a new bulk tool, DSBulk, for kind of some of the ETL extract and load functionality.
Okay, I didn't realize it was all in your group. Nice. Yeah. Now I know who to go blame for anything that goes wrong.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. How about you though? Can you give our audience a little bit of background? Who's Chris Splinter? Who's this guy?
Sure. So I grew up in Massachusetts, and then I moved out to California for DataStax. Lived out on the West Coast, soaked up some sunshine, and then I moved to Chicago, and
That's where I'm from. I'm from Chicago. It's a good city.
Yeah.
Good place.
It's just, it's May now, and it's still cold, so, you know.
That's right. You can bring that down to, like, Orlando. I'm okay with that. Bring it down. My wife wouldn't be happy with that. So all right. So today we're going to dig into all the fun details is in regards to the DSE 6, the DataStax Enterprise 6 drivers. So why don't you have at it? Let's see what you got. What's coming?
Yeah, DSE 6 was huge.
Yeah.
Huge step for our company. And drivers were right there in lockstep with the server. A couple of the big things there, we added the batch mutations to the DSE Graph Fluent API.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so really what that means is that if you need to, it improves the overall write performance profile when you're trying to write to your DSE graph or update things, because instead of executing things one at a time, you can just submit it as one large chunk.
Oh, okay. So you mean like right now, like I'm thinking of the application that we have, and for every new vertex or whatever I need to put in, I have to do I have to do those one at a time. So now I can batch those up and send them in a go.
Right. So let's say that you have like a bunch of vertices that are like in the same partition.
Yeah.
You can just put those all in at one time and you're good to go.
Does that include edges, relationships as well?
Yep.
Or, oh, really?
It includes edges as well, and the syntax is exactly the same really as, well, not exactly the same. The objects have a little bit different names in Java specifically, but it's similar in terms of you build your batch object on the client side and you just add your statements to that batch and then send it just one time from the client.
Okay, that's awesome.
Via the same execute graph methods that are already there.
Okay, nice. So is that all on the graph front? Do you have more as far as that goes, or?
So that was really the big thing that we added to DSE Graph.
Yeah, because that's huge.
Yeah, we've been pretty much focusing most of our efforts on the Fluent API.
Okay.
So we're trying to kind of elevate that further and further as we go on here, and that's kind of our main focus from the client side for DSE Graph.
Okay, now I heard that. So, okay, for anyone watching this who happens to know me or some of the things we've put up before, right? I'm all about the DSLs in Java, the Gremlin DSLs in Java, because they're just awesome. They as far as I'm concerned, they greatly simplify things. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been waiting for those to come out for the other languages, and I didn't think they were going to come out for a while. And then all of a sudden, boom! It comes out for Node and C#. Is that true?
That is true. So I don't know if you know Jorge. He's the developer on C# and Node.js, and so he doesn't sleep ever. And so he got both those things out the door, kind of timing up nicely with DSE 6.0, and now that Fluent API is available in Node and C# too. So,
that's awesome.
The last one on that list is going to be C++, and there's a few things that we need to check off first before we get to the Fluent API there, but we're doing the things that we need to do to get there in the future.
Okay. So that's actually kind of huge, because again, like the DSL support, I can't talk to that enough as far as what that means. And having that in both Node, actually, and I have a vested interest because, funny enough, for our killer video reference app, we support C# and Node, and we were kind of waiting for the DSL stuff.
Well,
so.
I mean, you're right. It just simplifies the code so much,
Yeah.
and just makes things so much more readable and compact. And when you're going through and reading what your DSL is for that given language, it's just much better than whatever gremlin you were writing before. So yeah, we were pretty psyched about getting those out for C# and Node.
Cool, cool. So what else you got? I'm just going to keep hitting them out. I'm like, more, give me more. Go, more.
Well, another one of the big improvements that we made from the client side for DSE 6 was with continuous paging.
Okay.
And now this continuous paging is a bit of not necessarily a first-class citizen in the driver, and we'll get to some of those reasons maybe later on. The use case for continuous paging is more on the analytics side, where you know that you're going to be doing a full table scan. So what continuous paging does is it removes, to provide the point of reference here, with traditional paging, the way that it works is when you're iterating over that result, each time that you get done with one page, the client then has to go and tell the server, hey, I want more, hey, I want more. Right. But the server isn't preparing those things ahead of time. It's just kind of sitting there waiting for you to tell it what to do.
Okay.
With continuous paging, you tell it in the initial request, like, hey, I'm going to be getting this whole thing while I'm reading through. Why don't you continue to prepare the next pages for me?
Oh, and that's doing that on the server end?
Yeah, so the server's like still working while the client's consuming. And that's kind of the big advantage of continuous paging. But the reason why it's more of just an analytics use case is that for analytics, like full table scans are much more common than just SQL when you might be reading the first page of results to display on your web page, and then the user hits next, and then you grab the next page. So that's why we haven't necessarily elevated it to a first-class citizen in the driver, but we built in DSE 6.0, the big improvement was with the back pressure mechanism that was working there.
Okay.
So now, instead of what was happening before is that if the client wasn't consuming the pages as fast as the server was preparing them, you couldn't make other queries along that same connection because it would just stall. But now there's a much better mechanism where the client and the server are working together a little bit better, so that it reduces the chances that the client gets overwhelmed and your queries alongside that connection are perfect.
Okay, so not only, so it sounds like you definitely well enhanced the back pressure mechanism there, right?
Yeah.
But then you also decreased the overall lag from a paging standpoint because you're no longer, the server's no longer just sitting there waiting for stuff. It's actually kind of being smart about it.
And so where these improvements really manifest themselves are, like I said, for the analytics use cases, but also in DSBulk. DSBulk also uses continuous paging.
What's DSBulk?
So DSBulk, we released this new tool that lets you take input from either CSV or JSON format and writes them to the database faster than any other tool. So CQLSH, the copy to and from was the old way. And we made it a point to beat that performance by a pretty good measure. So
so is that like the de facto standard that you would, if you were telling someone right now, hey, you've got a large data set, right? CSV, JSON, or whatever, and you want to get that into your DSE database. Is DSBulk as of 6.0 the way you'd be like, yeah, that's the way you need to start doing this?
Absolutely. It's by far the best tool to do that, and it's cool because like it even extends to use cases for unloading. Let's say that you want to just maybe do some, I don't know, if you're a data scientist and you want to kind of explore that data, you can actually unload from DSE 2 and select what you are unloading so that you can then take that CSV or JSON and throw your pandas on top of it or whatever other programs you want to use. So that's just another use case for it. So it not only loads, but it also unloads, and there's just a lot of uses. I always just use it when, like an example is we had this survey, and I wanted to perform some searches on it and get some more meaning out of it. So I used DSBulk to load that survey. That was it. The responses were in CSV format. I used DSBulk and just threw it into DSE.
Okay.
So it's cool.
Okay, that's awesome. So all right, I wanna throw. Well, we'll find out if it's a curveball or not. Right? Okay. I've been thinking about this one. I want to.
Well, I used to play baseball, so.
Well, there's that. Okay,
I got
good.
you.
All right, good. So. I want to talk a little bit about multi-model.
Yeah.
All right, I want to talk about multi-model. And well, I have thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Okay.
So what is it, as far as the driver support, like what, right now, I mean, there are multiple workloads that exist in DSE, right, that I can get access to. Each of them have their specific functions. What does that look like as far as driver support to support those workloads in DSE 6?
Yep. So the whole multi-model story with DSE is actually something that's really interesting. Because we're integrating all these different technologies into one box of goodies.
Yeah.
And for the developer solutions, we're trying to make the access to those different systems like as seamless as possible.
Right.
So the state of affairs today is that you can leverage DSE Search, DSE Core, DSE Graph, all through the DataStax drivers.
Right.
So like, let's say that you had some web page where you wanted to do some fuzzy searching and get results back. And in order to get like recommended results that might be relevant to whoever's typing on their keyboard, you use DSE Graph for some recommendations there. And then, I don't know, you can use Core for editing to get that
time series data or something.
Right. Well, you would get some results out of your search and graph queries, and then you can throw that into just your core query to make sure that you get the right data that is relevant to the user that's using that web page. So that's kind of the world that we're dealing with, and we're trying to make that easier and easier for developers to use and understand. Because right now you definitely do have to understand what portion of the DSE stack you're hitting.
Right.
Because the features aren't completely uniform right now and just in the same interface. So that's something that we're definitely working on, and something that we want to keep telling that story as we go forward here. But it certainly is a work in progress.
So as far as like the uniformity aspect, right? Now I'm curious, let's take DSE Search, right? I know as of DSE 6, there's now SQL or SQL-like syntax that you can use to power your search queries. Is that part of what you're doing in the driver work?
Yeah, so that part is actually kind of seamless for the driver.
Yeah.
Because you are just sending that as a SQL query.
Right.
And that actually makes our life a lot easier in Developer Solutions, because we can just throw that SQL query through and you don't have to really do anything special for search. But what we do is we add the search-specific SQL syntax to the query builder, so you can.
Oh, okay. So
leverage that stuff
I've worked with the driver a little bit, from this standpoint, right? So let's say that I had a search or a set of search indexes that were implemented on a bunch of fields in one of my tables, right? Mm-hmm. Then I now, compared to what I had to do before, right? If I wanted to do that, I could use search. I'd have to put in like Solar Query, blah blah blah. But now I can just say contains, use the normal kind of operators that I would have expected in the SQL world.
And you also, moving up a step there,
Yeah.
the first thing you can do too is just create your index directly in SQL-SH, and it's just create index on keyspace table.
And it just generates
and then
them
you
for
write the columns that you want to,
Right.
So even that portion of it, that's been around since DSE 5.1, but still, that portion of it is all just being baked into SQL, and we're going to continue to make strides there as well.
Okay, so I don't want to undersell this part of it, because I know that when I came across this in the drivers, in the new drivers, I was totally stoked, because it made it so much easier and so much more natural for me to just walk into that. Now, you said something a little bit earlier though. It sounds like there's some fun going, there's some intelligence in the driver underneath the hood. So when you're using those particular operators, what happens if I don't have a search index, right? How's it?
Well, with that, honestly, that's more handled on the server side right now.
It is,
if you don't have the index created, you'll still get the
same errors I would have before.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so you do still have to create that index in order to perform those sorts of operations seamlessly in the SQL.
But if it is there, it'll automatically use those indexes for you. You don't have to directly manage it.
Right. So and that's what we're talking about in terms of, from the developer, trying to reduce the amount that you have to understand about what portion of the server you're hitting.
Okay.
We want it to just be easy. You talk to DSE. We don't want you to have to think, I'm talking to DSE Search, I'm talking to DSE Graph.
Right.
We want it to be, I'm talking to DSE.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our vision for where we're going to continue to go with this product here.
Okay. And then there's also, just getting into a little bit about the session cluster config and the actual cluster object and so on and so forth. I know there's some changes there, and in particular on the cluster config, it's another part of the unification, if you will, right? Because I can use the single set of drivers, and I'm talking Java here, right? You know, I can use the single set of drivers, and for me to add on graph, it was just a couple parameters that I set in my cluster config, you know, not much, and bam, I had graph traversal support with my graph. That's kind of awesome.
Right. So that's what we're doing on the client side to kind of add to this story is that you create your DSE session and do whatever you want.
And there you go.
Go talk to DSE.
You've got all your models.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now though the actual execution method for that is distinguished. So you have to, like if you're just doing CQL or this search stuff, you'd use DSE session.execute, but with graph it's still DSE session.execute graph. Right. So I mean,
I think that's fine. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it's
but you can make the argument it should just be execute. But maybe we'll be there someday. But just stating the.
But for now, I mean, it's pretty unified. It's one little extra call. It's not, it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to knock you on that one at the moment. For now.
Okay.
But what I will do, is, so we talked about core, we talked about search, we talked about graph. There's one missing.
What's that? What's missing?
Analytics. What's going on with analytics?
Analytics. Yeah.
And the unification.
Yeah. Yeah. So we don't talk about analytics. No.
Oh, okay. Well, we just move on then.
So yeah. No, it is true though that as we mentioned, the DataStax drivers right now, you can do your search, you can do your core, you can do your graph, all from that one driver.
Right.
And what we're definitely, it's on our mind. It's not something that we're just, turning a blind eye to. If you use analytics right now, the suggested path that we say to start with is to use the JDBC driver with the always-on SQL server that came with DSE 6.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about AlwaysOn? What's that?
Yeah, so
the name is kind of self-explanatory, but I'm curious.
Yeah, so if you want to do SQL queries, it's always on.
Oh, there you go. Done. No.
So the big improvement there, though, is the automatic failover. Like if your host goes down, it re-elects the always-on host, so that it simplifies the management from an operator's perspective. Saying like in the old days, if your Spark SQL thrift server went down, the DBA would have to go in there, start it up on another node. You'd have to restart. You'd have to restart your applications to use that new JDBC connection with the different URL for the host. But now the server is failing over automatically, so that it's just smooth. If the host goes down, it'll elect another one and bring it back up for you.
Oh, and so is it? So in your cluster, is it aware of like where your master is? You don't. Because before it sounded pretty cumbersome because you had to go and point it to the new location, but now that part's being handled by the driver?
So yeah, getting back to the driver, the JDBC driver right now, we're working with them to do that detection of the host that I was connected to just went down. I need to get a new host, and in Studio right now, actually, we're handling this manually, such that if we detect that JDB session is broken because one of the hosts went down on the server side, we are catching that and automatically reconnecting you to the new host. So the Studio experience there is actually pretty seamless right now.
Yeah, that seems like a big improvement. Okay.
But getting back to the question about analytics, we are very interested to see if these analytics use cases really do intersect the search, core, and graph use case, where you'd actually want to do those two types of queries alongside one another. And this is something that we're searching for feedback on, because we are kind of pushing the envelope with this multi-model story and doing all these different types of database access patterns from a single client.
Right.
So yeah, we'll see where this one goes.
Okay.
I'm interested to see where it goes, but yeah, it's definitely something that we have our eye on.
Okay. All right. Cool. So I'd like to I know the focus here is really more to focus on DSE 6, what just happened, but I want to hear about some of the stuff that's coming in the future. Now, before we do that, do we have anything else that you're like, dude, we totally missed this in the DSE 6 realm? Or are you ready to talk about some of the stuff that might be coming?
There were I mean, there were a few other minor improvements just for some of the stability things in like messages that are being passed in the protocol between the client and the server, but we can go ahead and move on.
Okay. All right. So with that, right, what do we have coming? I mean, what are you excited about?
So open source Java Driver 4 and DSE Java Driver 2 are right on the horizon.
Ooh.
And it's been
You want to give me time?
It's been a long time coming.
Okay.
And the improvements there, it's just going to simplify things across the board. We're super excited about that on the drivers team, kind of getting that next major out, because we very much we're pretty strict with the semantic versioning, so we never do any breakage of APIs for minor versions. But now that we have this major version, we are kind of turning the page on a lot of technical debt and kind of looking at it as a whole picture and kind of not reinventing the wheel, but definitely optimizing the wheel.
Okay. Is there anything in particular that's notable? Will there be any major changes in how I might interact with the driver or performance or anything?
Yeah, so one big thing that there definitely is going to be some changes needed in the applications, which I know everybody hates that. But again, we think that it's going to be worth it with some of the new things that we're doing here. One of the first and foremost things that I've gotten feedback on is that we're removing the cluster object.
Oh.
So typically you do all your configuration on the cluster object, and then that would be responsible for your control connection that would kind of propagate all the driver metadata and things like that.
Right.
But we had a lot of debates on this. I talked to a lot of folks about it, and it is kind of inefficient. Why do you have to create a cluster and a session object just to connect to your database? So we're moving all of that configuration down to the session level, where you just have one object and you'll have a DSE session and go from there.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like you're simplifying a lot.
We're simplifying things, right?
That's good.
And just to kind of speak to some of the other big changes coming there, we're adding this new configuration option such that you can specify your driver configuration in a file. Oh. So what that does is it really simplifies things. If you're deploying, hundreds of clients, you can just share that file around instead of having the code built into the program itself. So
interesting.
Just also from like a readability and shareability perspective, I personally think that that's a great improvement. So yeah, that's coming too.
Okay.
I'll try not to go on and on and on here, but the other thing that
no, that's good.
the other thing
that's why we're here.
The other thing that I'm really excited about that's coming there is we're adding built-in request throttling.
See, now you sound like me. Right? Yeah, I do that. Request throttling. All right.
So what the big thing there though is that it kind of removes a lot of the complications from the async execution model, where we'll now handle that for you, and you'll just supply, what's your max requests that you want to allow at one time, and the driver will handle applying that ceiling. So I think that's pretty great from a application developer standpoint, because it also gives you more control over. I know that my client's only going to be putting this stress on the cluster, and it's not going to be running wild in case you have some sort of spike in traffic or something like that, and instead you would just spin up instances of your application incrementally to handle that load. So it just kind of also gives you a lot more control over your whole system. So
okay, all right. Well, so we've been focusing a lot on the Java pieces, right? How about some of the other drivers, right? You got stuff coming with those, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we do. So the Java driver does often lead the way for a lot of these things. It is our most popular driver, especially in the enterprise market that we see ourselves fitting into. But there also are next majors in new generation drivers coming for C and C++, C#, and Python as well. So just to kind of touch on each one of those, with the C# driver, next major is coming up. So a lot of the things that I just talked about for the Java driver we're also going to be sharing those goodies around to the other drivers that are coming up. So a lot of the same things that I just talked about, but the different languages also are at different stages of maturity.
Right.
So the big things coming up in the C# major, we're looking to improve some of the security there for .NET Core, specifically for Kerberos.
Okay.
Because I mean, security is just, it's arguably the most important thing for databases. So that's something that we're going to look to be adding. We're improving the metric story there to just add some more visibility into per node stats, but also session-wide stats, so that if you're running your applications in production, you need to know if things go wrong, why they're going wrong, and we're trying to improve the visibility there into some of that. And then also another big thing that we're adding is the execution profiles.
Okay.
And what those allow you to do is you build these profiles that might have different timeouts or even contact a different data center, and then you pass that to the execution method, and then that kind of steers your queries depending on the way that you're telling it to execute.
Okay.
So that kind of just adds a lot more flexibility, especially for a multi-data center environment, and also the multi-workload environment, if you want to steer your queries to different places depending on what you're doing in that query.
Right. Now, for you mentioned driver parity, right? And I recognize, right? They're different projects, they're different languages, right? We have our reference app that we have to keep it parity to, and that can be a challenge sometimes. Do you guys have are the releases for these somewhat close as far as when you're releasing certain features for the various drivers, or totally putting you on the spot here?
You know what? Each driver is very much on its own schedule.
Okay.
Except for when we need to support things that are on the server. We view those changes like the things that the things that the server needs. All of the drivers will get those done before the server goes out.
I see. Okay.
But in terms of the new features that are added to each language, it's very much just based on a priority system, where if we have a lot of people that want this feature, or if it's like a pretty crucial feature to what we're trying to do, we'll elevate that over others.
Well, and there's also some, I know that depending on what language you're in, there are differences in those languages that don't always, translate from one to the other.
Features don't always extend to all the languages, but this is something that we're very cognizant of. We got our eye on it. We know exactly where certain drivers need to catch up in that sort of thing. So,
but it sounds like at the server level, though, for those things that are major server changes, right? That those things take priority and they get pushed down to the drivers. Like the drivers, they'll have that support. That's not an issue.
Oh yeah, our drivers team jumps on those things like they're on it. So yeah. So that's C#, and those are some of the big changes coming there. And then the C and C++ driver is another one that I'm super excited for.
Okay.
Our guys, Panic and Pharaoh, have been really pounding on that. Kind of a next-gen architecture that will improve a lot of the threading model using a shared nothing approach. That'll just improve a lot of the internals of the driver. It'll be more performant, and overall just a better experience there.
Shared nothing sounds very greedy.
Yeah.
I share nothing with you.
I'm selfish. Yeah, but that's a big one. We've been chugging along on that for a good amount of time now, kind of looking at different approaches, which one are going to have the best outcomes. And I kind of mentioned this earlier, that the C++ driver right now doesn't have a Fluent API.
Okay.
So for Graph.
Right.
And so in order to make that easier, we need to build a C++ API into that driver, because we currently don't have one. So a lot of our customers are doing the same thing, where they're wrapping the C functions there, but we want to just build that into the driver, and that will enable us to create that Fluent API on top of it.
That'll be nice for folks using Graph who are in apps using C++, because I know I've done that with Java, Node. I mean, that's just really nice support compared to like using the string API.
Yeah.
And by the way, speaking of that, so just moving back to the Graph stuff real quick. So
we're all over the place, man.
Yeah. Well, it's a conversation with David. Hi, that's what happens.
Scatterbrained.
But as far as like the Fluent API goes and Graph, is that going to be the de facto scenario? Because I know there was the string API. I haven't used it in a long time because I moved on to the Fluent API, right?
Yeah.
Is that still going to be a thing? Is it moving away, or?
So we still have the string API.
Okay.
It'll likely be around for a little while to come here. But the Fluent API is absolutely where we're focusing our attention.
Okay.
New features, new functionalities. The Fluent API is where we put those things in first. It's really what we encourage people to use. It offers just a lot of developer niceties, even compile time checks, things like that. So we really want people using the Fluent API in case the string API eventually goes away. But I'm not making any commitments there. But yeah.
So if someone were to start today using graph features with the drivers, you'd say Fluent API.
Fluent API. Fluent API. DSE drivers, Fluent API.
Okay, cool. Now, we were talking a little bit about some of the driver parity, right? And totally, again, understanding that that can be challenging with different languages and stuff to keep everything in parity. Are there any, like, say, initiatives or anything that you're doing, like, across all the drivers that you're kind of keeping them all in sync with?
So one of the big things that we've seen is that with a lot of the drivers, we've just kind of thrown things in there because we thought, oh, this might be a good idea, and then we threw it in. That
was very honest. That was very honest.
That was in the early days, all right? That was back in the day, but
honest time with Chris, anyway.
Yeah, and now we're really looking to remove a lot of those sharp edges that we've seen customers and users, fall into holes on, and that aren't necessarily providing as much benefit as they are harm.
Okay.
So one of the big things is we're looking to first deprecate a lot of those features and then eventually remove them, just to kind of, have you heard of the paradox of choice? When you give people a bunch of different choices, it actually really confuses things and makes things harder. Okay. So we're trying to kind of steer users down the happy path and kind of make our best practices known, make our stance on things known. And just an example of that, we'll get a bunch of hate mail after this video mentioning this, but we're looking to remove the downgrading consistency retry policy. Because that really has just produced very inconsistent behavior, and we question the users, and we want them to understand that if you can query at a lower consistency level, then why not just always query at that level? If you can handle that in your application, if that's okay with you, then why not just always query at that?
Right.
Instead of starting at local quorum and then falling back to say local one.
Right.
If local one is okay, then just use that always.
Right.
So there are some definitely there's both sides to the debate, and I'm always happy to talk to people about those sides and where we have fallen on that side of the fence. But
any hate mail sent to chris.splinter@datastax.com.
Accepting any. I love that kind of stuff. Oh yeah. So yeah, removing missed features is a big initiative that we're trying to apply across all the drivers. But then another one too, as we've been talking about, is feature parity. We want to provide that uniform experience across the board for each one of the languages, such that if you're on an application team at company X and you have, let's say, 3 different teams, they can still share their knowledge about the drivers across languages, even if they're all using different, because they all work the same.
Right.
That's a really, in my opinion, a very nice thing to enable by having feature parity across the drivers. So that's another one that we're doing. And then the last big one is we're really trying to improve our documentation.
Okay.
We understand that a lot of this stuff can be pretty difficult. Your boss comes to you and says, hey, you need to go build this fraud detection application, have at it. You're like,
yeah, that's a lot in one.
Okay, I've never used DSE before.
Yeah.
How do I do this? And we're trying to make strides in showing people we're the experts here. We can help you here.
So I want to dig into this a little bit. So are you saying, I'm going to totally try not to put words in your mouth, but are you saying are you going to be looking maybe in some of the documentation to expand and say use cases in certain cases?
So we actually have a couple different things that we're going to start doing here. The first one is we're going to work on a new developer guide that kind of talks people through the getting started process and kind of highlights the different features from a higher level.
Right.
Not necessarily digging into code, but really digging into the concepts. And then from those pages, you'll be able to reach out to the individual languages to see like what the API looks like and exactly how you would use that. But another facet of this is, we're trying to really dissect these use cases and apply best practices to show how you would build that. And we're calling them recipes, but tomato.
Recipes works. I think it makes sense what that means. Okay.
Yeah. So, those are just the efforts that we got going on across the drivers. So, exciting times.
Yeah, no, that's a ton of stuff, right? Between the DSE 6 stuff and then between all the future things.
Yeah.
I know, it's the weirdest thing in this job to feel like things with drivers are exciting, but honestly,
well, it's your touch point, right? As a developer, it's your first touch point to DSE. So.
I'm excited as well. So I can't wait to critique all your stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, I told you I love hate mail, so shoot that my way.
Take them up on that. Yeah. All right. No, this has been great. Do you have anything else though before we wrap things up? Do you have anything else that you want to tell anybody, or any things we missed or whatever?
Yeah, here's a not shameless plug. We're hiring for Java and C#, so if you would like to contribute to some of the things that we've been talking about here, reach out. The description of the job descriptions are on our website, so just datastax.com and you can find your stuff there.
There you go. So if you want to work with this guy.
And I also have to give a huge shout out to the drivers team. The guys there are some of the hardest working people I know, and they make all this stuff possible. I just talk about it. So that's shout out to the drivers team here at DataStax.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris Splinter. That was great. And everyone watching, thank you for watching another version of the Distributed Data Show. See ya.
Thank you for joining us again for the Distributed Data Show. We love your feedback, so go to the Distributed Data Show page on DataStax Academy and tell us what you think. You can also find us on the DataStax Academy YouTube channel, or find our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get great podcasts. While you're there, make sure and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.